What we're going to specifically focus on today is walking. Now, the average person, the last study I looked at, we walk about 5,000 steps a day. So imagine if you have just a small glitch, just a tiny little, as Tom Oakler puts it, hitch in your get along, okay? Now, what would happen? 5,000 times a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, year after year after year, what would happen to you? Compensatory mechanisms, structures start to break down and get injured. You're going to end up with some issues, right? So wouldn't it be good to make sure you were doing things that really promote a healthy walking ability? Walking is a three-plane function. Okay, even though you might think of it, I know you know by now, sagittal plane is forward, moving forward and back, right? So when we walk, we move forward. So why wouldn't that just be a sagittal plane motion? Well, I'm going to teach you why it's a three-plane motion. When I go to pick up my right foot, all right, my left hip is actually loading eccentrically. These muscles, it's on a very minute level, are loading because this hip wants to go like that, right? It wants to drop down. Now, you've seen people who limp. This is actually called a Trendelenburg gait, by the way. But when you see people who limp, it's because the gluteus medius muscle is not working correctly. And so that hip just kind of drops, okay? So that's frontal plane, right? Side to side movement. So when you walk, you're engaging frontal plane activity in your hip muscles, all right? Now, you're also rotating. Yes, you are. You're getting a little bit of rotation. We want a nice amount of rotation in the trunk when you walk. When you don't have good rotation in the trunk, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to end up with sort of a very, very minute whiplash. And I know you're like, what? Well, I'm going to explain that. When motion meets stillness, okay, that's whiplash. So think about it. If you're in a car and your car is moving, that's motion, and it meets stillness, it hits an object, and bam, it stops. That's whiplash, okay? Well, walking, if you're not rotating nicely in the trunk, if you don't have good mobility in your hip extensors, right, or your hip flexors, and they don't like to extend, and you don't have good dorsiflexion and eversion and all those good things at the ankles, you're going to end up with a very micro trauma, whiplash. So over time, that's not going to be so hot for you either, right? So, and what's this? This is transverse plane, rotation, right? So when I go to walk, see, rotation. And of course, I'm making it look silly, but I wanted to really show you that rotation component, okay? So we've got the sagittal plane, we've got the ankle dorsiflexion, we've got hip extension that's required, we've got the transverse plane, the ribs have to rotate, we've got the frontal plane, the hips have to abduct, but they have to load and control that motion. There's a lot more that goes on. You can study gait for years, or I should say walking for years, but I'm going to keep it to those basic truths, okay? It's a three-plane function. It requires good ankle dorsiflexion, good hip extension, good rib rotation, and stable hip abduction, okay? Now, there are other things, but those are really major components of walking.